Welcome to the I Get Better podcast with your hosts, Charlene Renee and Phaedra Smith, where we discuss topics related to life, love, mental, physical, and spiritual health, and how we can all get better together.
Okay, welcome back to I Get Better. I am your host, Charlene Renee.
And I am Phaedra.
And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about how I get better when I let go. And specifically, we're going to be talking about letting go of guilt and shame.
Yes, this will be a good topic.
Definitely. So as you know, we always like to start off with defining the thing that we're going to be discussing. So Phaedra, I know you have a good definition of guilt and shame that you want to share with the audience today, and then we will jump right in on why it's important and how to get better at letting go.
So I am still kind of on my Brene Brown kick, and so she, in her book, The Gifts of Imperfection, which I really do recommend to everyone, she talks about guilt and shame. And so her definition is, the definition of guilt is I did something bad. And the definition of shame is I am bad. This is, okay. Shame is saying this is who we are. And guilt is saying this is about our behavior.
Right. Yeah. And then both of them are basically describing a feeling that you have. I've always looked at guilt as, like you said, like feeling like you made a mistake and then not being able to release yourself from it, or others may not release you from your mistake. And then with shame, I always look at it more as a deeper, long-held guilt, or just more of embarrassment or feeling like inadequate when you're comparing yourself to other people.
Right. So, and I think the biggest thing is, like, with guilt, if you experience guilt, like, it should go away because maybe you should be able to change your behavior. And I think with shame is, I don't know how that kind of tells you that's how you feel about yourself as a person. So instead of me doing something bad, I am a bad person. So I do agree with you, Charlene, that shame kind of like goes a little bit deeper, in that it can cause way more problems on you as a person individually. And I don't know how it would necessarily change your behavior, because it would really probably shape who you are as a person.
Right. And then, because you think about, usually when I think of shame, it's like people might say you should be ashamed of yourself based on some behavior that you did. Or there are people who feel no shame and they just let it all hang out. They don't care what other people think and they just do them. And it's things that people might think they should be ashamed of, and they just have no shame in it. So I think that's a good start, working definition of both guilt and shame. So now I want to go ahead and jump right in on why is this important. I always like to give the why of a topic to give us something to anchor it to. Why should we get better at this? So a few things, like when I'm working with clients who are experiencing guilt about something that they did, I like to talk about why it's important to get over it or get past it. Because what happens is when you are feeling guilt, you're just reliving the past. You're reliving something that you did that you either wish you could change. Sometimes you can, make up for a mistake, but then there are other things that when you make a mistake, you can't necessarily correct it. And so now you're dealing with this guilt about something you can't fix and you can't change. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to get better at letting go of this guilt, because now you are keeping yourself and your progress stuck, because you can't move forward into your future and you can't really experience joy in the present if you're being bogged down and held down by this guilt or this long-held shame about something. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think it's very important for us to work on getting better at that. Shame, I always, like I said, look at it like something that someone else puts on you, more so than, I know it says it's something you feel you may internalize and think that you're bad, but I think it's other people making you feel ashamed because you're embarrassed. And embarrassment comes from outside. You're thinking someone else is looking at you or watching you and what you do. Now, there are some times where you can internalize shame about things that nobody knows about, but you know that it happened, or you know that you did it, and you feel that shame based on the fear that someone might find out about something that you did?
Well, I so based on her research, her understanding is that, what I'm interpreting from her is that prolonged guilt can turn into shame. And so when people use the term, you should be ashamed of yourself, they're really trying to make you feel guilty. And I think that when you just let guilt sit there and you don't recognize it for what it is, and you don't change behaviors, or maybe it was nothing you actually did. Maybe you just have this prolonged, this person that continually tells you that you're a bad person, or that you should be ashamed of your behavior, and they trying to embarrass you. Those things kind of make up the core of who we are. It kind of makes up our core beliefs about ourselves. And so we start to take on this shame. Like, I'm afraid to voice my opinions because the core of me feels like I'm a bad person, or I can't do things right. So we have to start dealing with, what's my core belief about myself? Because shame and guilt, they grow, they metastasize, and they start to spread through our lives. So like you said, they prohibit us from living in the present and moving on to our future in a positive and joyous way.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. Also, briefly, I want to touch on, what are the psychological and physical impacts of holding on long term to the feeling of guilt? And so a few things that I want to bring up is, psychologically, what does it do to your mental health? So it can be very distressing to your physical health to hold on to guilt. It can lead to depression. It can lead to anxiety. I've even read that it can contribute to some OCD tendencies and symptoms of obsessive compulsions. Not just what people may think, oh, OCD means you're just a neat freak. No, there are some other compulsions that you might participate in because you want to try to rectify this feeling of guilt. Like, if I made this mistake, I got to try to make everything right and perfect. So now I'm going to be very compulsive in my behavior and try to be a perfectionist, so to speak, to make up for. And so that's a few psychological impacts. Physical impacts of guilt is that you may lose sleep. You might start to experience some insomnia, lack of sleep, trouble sleeping at night. It can impact your stomach, and digestive issues can occur. You may have body pains, muscle pains, headache. These are some physical symptoms that may come about. You may also find yourself really tearful and sad just because you are in this state of guilt and shame. So it's important to deal with this, because that is a lot of stress and pressure on your body, physically and mentally, when you are maintaining this emotion of guilt.
Right. I like what you said on perfectionism, because in this book, it talks about that perfectionism is not the same thing as striving to be your best. Perfectionism is not self-improvement. So perfectionism is not about healthy achievement and growth. It's really about the belief that if we live perfect, look perfect, act perfect, then we can minimize or avoid the pain of blame, judgment, and shame. It's a shield. Mm-hmm. So and it's something that you really can't, it's hard to come out of, because if you don't win the game, then what are you telling yourself? Okay, I should have done that better. As opposed to saying, no one's perfect. Like, I'm not gonna, achieve, be the winner of all the things. But when we have these unattainable goals for ourselves, it does lead to those things like depression and anxiety and sleep deprivation.
Right. So now I want to kind of touch on, really briefly, what are some different types of guilt? So there are several categories of guilt, and I'm sure there's more than 3, but I want to touch on at least these 3 different types of guilt. And they are reactive guilt, anticipatory guilt, and existential guilt. So reactive guilt is basically that it's a reaction to something that you did. So you believe you acted against either your own personal beliefs or what's morally good or standards that society has for acceptable behavior, and you've acted poorly. And so now you react to that behavior by feeling guilty. So it's that aftermath. Then you may have anticipatory guilt. So now you are anticipating feeling guilty about something that you may do. So instead of doing that thing, you're saying, I don't want to feel guilty, so I'm not going to do something. So I anticipate this action may cause me to feel guilty, so I'm going to avoid doing this behavior. And then existential is a little more difficult to grasp, but it's basically like a broader perspective of injustice. Like, life isn't fair, or I'm guilty because maybe I feel like I have more than other people have, and I feel guilty about that. Like, I feel guilty that I'm more affluent than someone else is, and now I have guilt on myself because life isn't just and everyone should be equal. So some people do really feel that. I was, reading a book once where it was this lady whose father was really wealthy, and he left her a lot of money, and she felt bad about that because she felt she didn't do anything to earn it or deserve this wealth. And she saw these other people suffering in the world, so she was even afraid to spend money or look like she was wealthy, and it caused a lot of internalized guilt for her, where she couldn't really be herself because she was taking on this guilt. So that's just a little brief touch on the different types of guilt, but I really want us to get into some of the sources that contribute to why we feel guilty. What are some things that lead to us feeling that feeling of guilt? So let's start with family. Family, right?
Family.
So family, a lot of cultures have this within their family group where they are held to a standard within their family, and they are made to feel that certain things are right or wrong, starting with growing up and your parents telling you certain things are right and wrong. And they may say that they're disappointed in you because you behave in a certain way, and now you're starting to feel guilty because you cannot be yourself because it's interpreted as wrong. And then it might lead to, like you said, those feelings of shame, like I'm a bad person because my mom and my dad tell me I am, because I'm doing these things that they don't like and they're telling me I'm wrong. And so now you're going to be seeking the approval of your parents or other family members so that you don't feel guilty.
And let's talk about that 5-year-old or that 10-year-old at the age of 20, 25, and 30, that person that was seeking, now you're seeking validation from everybody, trying to appease this sense of guilt that you, or this now that the guilt that maybe has turned into shame about you as a person. I'm a bad person, or I can't make any mistakes, or I can't make decisions on my own. So that now that turns into this belief about yourself. And so I like what you said about that, because I do think that that's a big issue with us, and especially that 25-year-old or that 30-year-old that you went to college and got this degree because that's what you were supposed to do. So when you have this, you have these expectations of your family that you feel like you haven't met, you feel a sense of guilt, and you can feel a sense of shame as a person. So when we talk about letting go, I think a part of letting go is letting go of those family expectations or those rules that may not have been always spoken. They could be these unspoken rules that you kind of just learned from your family. And so letting go means really meaning embracing who you are. You could be gaining things by letting go.
Yeah, definitely. Another source, I think a major source of guilt is this cultural guilt. And what happens is you may grow up in a certain culture that has their own set of beliefs, values, and traditions, and you may feel guilty if your own personal code, moral or ethical code, does not line up with that. And so you may feel like certain behavior, there's nothing wrong with it, but you're struggling with how to find that balance between maintaining those cultural ties and being connected to your community and also being true to yourself. So you may feel like doing a certain thing, like, and some of this ties to religious beliefs as well, like sex before marriage. Well, in my culture, it's deemed as wrong, or in my religious beliefs, it's deemed as wrong, but I don't personally think that it's wrong. So now I'm struggling with that guilt of living up to these societal or cultural norms because I'll be disgraced or I'll be seen in a certain way in my community, in my culture, and I may not be able to come back from it and be accepted back into this community and culture. So
there's also this fear of not belonging or not knowing how to fit in, how to be multifaceted and fit in. And I think that's one of the things I think Black people definitely struggle with, especially if you're educated. Like, you don't know how to act sometimes. It's like
you got multiple personality disorder.
I mean, really, you're like, you know, I mean, I remember when I first moved to Pensacola, like this old white man was like, "Oh, you speak so well." And, you know, it took me a minute because I had to let things sit in. And then afterwards, I'm like, that made me mad. But that's the thing. Can I be educated and Black? And then also in my Black culture, can I be educated and Black and still be hip? Can I still
down? Are you down with the fam?
Yeah, I'm still woke. And so it's been able, how can I embrace myself and still be relevant in society? And so that is a thing that I think a lot of minorities struggle with.
Yeah, and I don't think it's just minorities. I think there are, well, I guess it depends on your definition of minority, but I think a lot of different ethnic groups
that's what I mean.
Struggle with it. Black, Asian, Indian, African, not African American, just different cultural groups, Italians. Mm-hmm. What do they call it? The old, I don't want to misspeak, but there's a culture where it's that mom's guilt, where or grandparents' guilt that they have they'll put on you to make you feel like, if I don't do this, you know, the good old mom's guilt's gonna come in and it's gonna be a problem. It's gonna be a problem if I don't do this. And so struggling with that identity of being yourself and coming up with your own code and still being able to be a part of the community it can be a major source of guilt.
I think I see it also in my Caucasian sisters and brothers, because they struggle with the fact that they probably still have very racist family members or even maybe relationships in their lives. And so for them to now be educated and be more culturally sensitive as individuals, and to have Black and Asian and, you know, Hispanic friends that they view as family, now that's putting them in a position where they have to make some changes. And so, you know, I can also see that being a problem with letting go of what is expected from your family, even though they are wrong, mm-hmm. and not like completely being apart from your family, because I still want to belong with my family, but I want to belong in a healthy way. And so I think that sometimes looks like setting up boundaries, or either letting go of some relationships that are no longer aligning with your values.
Yes, boundaries is definitely helpful when it comes from guilt imposed by other people. Not that self-imposed guilt, but when other people are making you feel guilty, you may need to set up some boundaries to protect your peace and your own conscience. Yeah. So I think it's time to talk about what are some ways that we can get better at letting go of these feelings of guilt.
Well, we talked about one of them, which is boundaries.
Yes, that is definitely important. Setting up boundaries means saying no, not spending time with or limiting your time with people who are not going to contribute to your growth and your mental health in a positive way. Learning how to maybe remove yourself or separate yourself from those things that don't serve you positively.
Right.
Another way I think that is important to be able to get better at letting go of feelings of guilt is to learn how to reframe. So reframing is a therapeutic term, but it's basically taking an event or an incident or a thought that is leading to those feelings of guilt, and then changing it or reframing it in a way that is different and altering that thought or altering that event in a way that is helpful. So the reframe is an important skill. Going to therapy can help with this. It's a little difficult to just explain it in the podcast and have it make sense. But if you're able to shift what you're thinking about yourself or about the action or the behavior that you did, then that helps change the feeling surrounding it.
Right. And I think shifting it with the help of a professional is helpful, because if you just walking around shifting all your guilt when maybe you are supposed to feel guilty about something, you turn it into something you don't want to be.
Yeah, okay? Because there is what I'll say is righteous guilt or justified guilt or adaptive guilt, not maladaptive, but guilt that is good if it leads to changed behavior when it needs to be changed.
Correct.
So that guilt is a positive guilt. But when we're talking about the guilt that's no longer serving you and it's not leading to change, it's just leading to those negative impacts and effects, then that's the guilt you need to let go of.
Right. And I think that does come with getting with somebody that can really help you with that. And it's not like you got to be in therapy for a long time. I mean, you might just need to be in therapy just to deal with that. But I want to talk about this this other practical way of getting over this guilt and shame and letting go. It's this idea that Brene talks about in her book about resilience and how do I become a resilient person. And so we've talked about this, Charlene, a lot in our other podcasts about being able to withstand the pain of being uncomfortable and having pain and being vulnerable. But what she specifically talks about is 5 common factors to resilient people. So she says, resilient people are resourceful and have good problem-solving skills. They are more likely to seek help. They hold on to the belief that they can do something that will help them manage their feelings and cope. They have social support systems that help them or that are available to them. They are connected with others, such as family or friends. And on the spiritual side of it, these type of people have these essential things that make up their resilience. And so one of them are cultivating hope, practicing critical awareness, letting go of numbing, and taking the edge off vulnerability, discomfort, and pain. So basically, they are not constantly trying to numb the pain, and they allow themselves to feel this pain. And then they also have ways to get past the pain. So I like that part where she said they are more likely to seek help, because I think that's a big deal in most cultures is that you get into this shame and guilt spiral because you don't talk about it. You don't talk to your friends and family. You don't go to a therapist. You don't get, and so therefore you never give yourself a chance to hear the words, you weren't wrong, or you're not a bad person.
Right. You're just talking about it amongst yourself in your own mind, in your head, and ruminating on this and just repeating it over and over and saying, man, I'm such a bad person, or I made this mistake. I made this mistake. Okay. Acknowledge the mistake, but then what do you do next?
Right. And acknowledge the fact that there's a possibility that you didn't make a mistake. There's a possibility that you're living out what your parents told you was wrong, or what you heard was wrong at some point in your life, but that possibly they had the wrong definition of that situation.
True. So now you may need to reframe.
Yes.
Say, I did not make a mistake. And before we wrap up, I just have a couple more ways, I think, and I'm not going to spend much time on them because we have a full episode on these last 2 things. And one way is acceptance, learning how to practice acceptance, accepting things for what they are, accepting that everyone makes mistakes and no one is perfect, and also being able to practice forgiveness of self. And we have an entire episode on forgiveness as well as an entire episode on acceptance. Make sure you go back and listen.
They're very good, guys. Check them out.
So I think this is an awesome step to learning how to let go of guilt and shame so that you can get better, continuing to get better. As always, we want you to like, share, subscribe, comment. We want to hear from you. We want to keep the conversation going on our Facebook page. We also always post things on our Instagram page. If you want to check out more resources, you can also go to our website, www.greenhousecounselingfl.com. And you can listen to all of our former episodes on that, as well as all streaming platforms such as podcasts on Apple, Spotify, Google Play, anywhere that you normally would stream, we usually can be found there.
Yeah. And you look up, it's I Get Better. It's all one word. So I know that a couple people couldn't find it because they were separating it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a good point. I Get Better podcast.
Yeah. So until next time, guys, let's keep getting better so we can do better in order to be better. We love y'all. Thank y'all.